what I want to do tonight, in addition to talking about the specific elements that we're looking at, is just give you a little bit more of the market reality and what has changed since the days when you could do a lot more of these bonds on a special obligation basis without GO. And I should point out, I did some research before tonight, and there's actually been more GO TIF projects in Kansas than you might think. Just a few of those cities from my unscientific survey would be Colby, Concordia, Newton, Topeka, Hiawatha, Hillsborough, Leavenworth, Russell, and I think there's some others with the UG and even Wichita, but I couldn't tell for sure. So anyway, it's something that has been broached, the GO financing. Obviously, again, it's nothing that we think is a slam dunk or something to be taken in a cavalier way, but it is something that I think reflects the changing market and the fact that it's just the universe of financing options has really shrunk in the last 5 years. So we're needing to be more creative and look at ways of getting to the market, getting the funding that we need for the project, but also mitigating the city's risk. So, a couple of pie charts here. Overall, we're looking at a total project cost of about $164 million by current accounting. It depends on what you count, but we're looking at about $128 million of private financing. That's the red, $128 million. About $30 million of proposed public funding. And what's not shown here is the other $6 million upfront of stormwater reimbursement that would be coming to the city. We've got that on another slide. But of the private financing, which is about 81% of the total Gateway specific, not counting the city's stormwater investment, as Tom alluded, there's going to be about $93 million in the mortgage, as well as about $35 million of total equity for that share. And that's broken out in this second pie there. Yeah.
Does that $35 million include the 28?
Yes. Well, right now the 28 includes loan money, but that's going to be that's going to transition into the permanent loan, and then we'll have to fill that bucket with new equity.
Okay. But essentially, yes, that's the case. The $28 million that we have invested currently, 16.5 is a development loan, and the rest is our cash, right? And we'll need to pay off the development loan. The likelihood is that the bank, HSBC, that gave us the development loan will be a participant in this construction loan. But when it's all said and done, we got to have $35 million of equity, our money, in the project.
Heart palpitations, right?
Just another day of work.
So, as I've mentioned in previous meetings, the proposed public funding target for the Gateway, based on the representations of the gap as we understand it currently, is $30 million. Right now we're proposing to fill that with a combination of $6 million in CID-based funding, $16 million in sales TIF funding, and $8 million in property TIF funding. And so this $30 million slice, about 19% of the total, not including the city's previous stormwater, breaks up as such with those different revenue streams. And I'll talk about the specific bonding mechanisms in a moment, but I wanted to give you sort of this macro view of the dollar amounts. And then finally, last but certainly not least, you know that for the Gateway specifically, the city has invested just about exactly $12 million, both in cost and then in carrying cost since those investments were made. And we're looking with these same revenue streams to fund $6 million up front towards reimbursing those costs so that you can pay down bonds. And then a minimum, and we think it'll be more than this actually, of $6 million in net present value from excess coverage on the TIF and the CID streams. We can talk more about that in a minute. Yeah, Lawrence.
I remember a $17 million number being thrown around.
Yes.
Why is it 17 to 12 now? What's the difference?
Yes.
17 was when we had a Star Bond project, and the Star Bond boundaries were the edges of all the roads that touched it. And once the star bonds went around, we had to shrink back to the gateway site, which is only 17 acres. Star bonds, we had 27 acres, so we grabbed all the road improvements, as well as those drainage improvements that went underneath Roland Drive and underneath the road.
It's mostly the road improvements with a little bit less drainage.
Okay. So then, we're looking at basically 4 public financing tools. The CID, which is the supplemental 1-cent sales tax on all of the retail sales except for the Walmart store. The sales tax increment, which is just going to be the 1-cent general city sales tax. It will not capture the current quarter-cent for streets, nor if the voters approve the parks sales tax that will be on the ballot, it won't capture that, or any other dedicated sales tax. It will just be capturing the 1% from the gateway sales. Property TIF is probably the best known TIF. It captures most of the incremental property taxes. Can't capture all of the school district taxes nor the state property tax. Of course, the state always likes to exempt itself. But we're looking at that revenue stream. And then finally, some sort of an assessment on the existing gateway drainage district. I'll just say right now that that last one is sort of to be determined. We haven't yet determined exactly how that will work in relationship to everything else. But we do see it as part of the funding mechanism and certainly part of the way the city will get back some of your investment up front in the stormwater.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What is the estimated time frame for paying off the bonds based on utilization of these revenue streams?
Good question. We've run these numbers very conservatively, assuming no inflation, so basically starting values and holding them flat. And we've also incorporated what we think are pretty conservative interest rate assumptions, meaning high interest rate assumptions, and coverage as well. So we're building in more revenues than are actually needed, to pay the dollars of principal and interest. So given that, we are looking at utilizing the entire TIF stream from when it would be created this fall, 2012, but really when it started until 2014, 2015, right, through the maximum duration of 2032. Now that said, if the project performs as expected and or does better than expected, you would have the ability to potentially pay down those bonds faster and not have that tax increment. You'll basically have a choice of, do you keep the TIF and keep pulling off excess coverage towards paying some of your stormwater debt, or prepaying those TIF bonds and decertifying the TIF and have it in general funds.
Can you explain the coverage a little further? Because I don't think that people understand what protection that gives you.
Yeah, well, so on one of the bond pieces, the sales tax increment bonds, one of the slices of this, you'll see the details in a minute, we're looking at having a minimum of 125 coverage. So what that means is that for every dollar of debt service, given the current revenue projections, we are showing, or really the performance showing $1.25 of revenues to cover that dollar of debt service. And again, that's assuming 0% inflation. So presumably, the project should increase sales, even if it's at a slow rate, and that coverage would increase then.
So approximately 18 years.
Right. Of actual TIF collections, 18 years. No?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm interrupting.
Do we have our RERC
I'm glad you asked that question.
back yet?
We just have met with them. They came into town this week. They are here in town right now. They spent much of today driving around. That's what they do. They drive. But we also had a very good conversation yesterday with Tom and 2 of his people that are involved with leasing, walking through all of the leases, all of the letters of intent, looking at competing shopping centers, so that we think that by the end of this month or the very first part of next month, we'll have, I really think we can get it by the end of this month, Jennifer. have RERC's analysis, at least in rough draft form, and then have a final, more polished draft that you can really be using in the beginning of October, once we're trying to finalize the development agreement.
That'd be really good, because it'd be nice to have the real numbers
Oh,
before you
yeah,
make a
absolutely.
decision.
Absolutely. So, these numbers we think are pretty conservative and doable, but they hinge first and foremost on RERC
Right, that's why we
and
did.
their analysis of, is this plausible? And, we've tried to take a conservative, almost pessimistic view of this, but as, I think as we discussed, it's possible also that RERC could come back and say, hey, guys, some of these numbers are actually too conservative, and we think the middle of the line.
Low, middle,
Like-
high.
Exactly. So it'll be very interesting to see, but I've been impressed in talking with them. They seem to already know the market very well, and they're spending a full, actually more than 3 days here on the ground on this trip. But I'm glad you asked that, because really, again, this financing plan is going to change, and some areas might grow, some areas might shrink, but we're targeting 36 million of total funding, right? 30 million upfront for the project, and 6 million upfront for the city's stormwater, and then also those cash flows on the tail end. So starting here in the first part of the top, or the pie, just again, and this goes into more detail in the following sheets, but we're looking at funding about $8.5 million through permanent taxable GO-CID bonds, again funded with the CID, supplemental sales tax, about $8.5 million through a permanent tax-exempt GO sales tip bond, approximately $8 million in taxable GO sales tip bonds. They would be taxable on a temporary basis because they would have a developer guarantee. And then by two, I mean they would be refunded with long-term special obligation bonds that would be secured just with the sales tip. With the property tip, this would most likely start taxable because we think there's probably going to need to be some developer guarantee there up front during construction and lease-up, but then it could go tax exempt ultimately. Throughout, however, it's going to be special obligation. There's never going to be a GO on that. And that's because property taxes in general are easier to project and are more stable than sales tax, and so we think that there's even more of a market for that without a GO at any point. And then finally, the smallest piece is that GO stormwater bond tied to the Gateway Drainage District, the Gateway Specific Drainage District, and that's to be determined.
Bruce?
Yeah.
So the 6 million for stormwater, I guess I was under the impression that we've already done all the stormwater improvements necessary for that area, and we've already issued bonds for that, and we've increased the stormwater utility fee to pay that back. This leads me to believe we're going to issue an additional $6 million in bonds for
No.
stormwater? Okay.
Well, it's not to cover new costs, it's so that you can essentially pay off some of the existing bonds and use the new TIP and CID debt to pay that off instead of your stormwater utility.
Are you talking like you're going to give us 6 million to pay down on the debt, and then you're going to go 6 million over
Over time as
over
well.
time? So that's going to be 12 million specifically going to our stormwater utility.
Exactly.
So, wait, so are we,
It's to pay off
Our
Well, to
bonds.
pay off
the existing
bonds,
debt.
right.
but
Right.
we're gonna issue more bonds to pay off existing bonds? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's right. We're at 12
Yes.
coming in, 12 million coming in to pay off existing debt, and we're going to issue $6 million of new debt.
Well, it's six of new debt, 6 over time for a total of 12. But the 6 over time is a present value, so it's really more than that.
Well, we're issuing $6 million of debt, the day we issue the debt, someone's going to pay us $6 million in cash.
Correct.
And I think I saw the developer is also going to pay $6 million.
No.
So we don't get that $6 million.
That's what I
No, you
thought it
do.
was like, it's,
But
$6
we,
million up front, $6 million paid over time. The $6 million up front, in terms of this public financing pie, is no different than money that the developer will receive that he's already spent. And it's just like us, we're receiving money that we've already spent.
the fact that it's issued as debt is kind of immaterial because that debt stream is paid off by the developer, and we don't care.
We just want our money.
So let me take another cut of this. I think I got it. So we're basically just moving $6 million of debt out of our existing stormwater debt pie, moving it over to the new $6 million debt, so that way our stormwater utility fees aren't paying down that $6 million of debt. It's
Right, it's different
project
CID.
is paying it down. We're just
Exactly.
cutting it out, moving it over, and paying it down to the public.
Correct. And but it's not just stormwater utility fees. As you guys know, the financing plan also includes the capital improvement fund currently, right?
Yeah.
And really, what the TIF and the CID do is allow you to reduce the amount you need to take out of your capital improvement fund in addition to the stormwater. Because the stormwater alone isn't at the point of covering all of the debt service. So one of the things we can do is we've got a chart that shows all of your stormwater-related debt service through final maturity, assuming you don't ever pay it off. And then it lines up against that, your stormwater utility revenues, and then what is the amount that needs to be covered from other sources. And then what we do is show, okay, the $6 million coming in and paying off some of that debt, so the debt requirement gets smaller, right? It shrinks. And then we show this cash coming in over time as well to help pay for the stormwater debt, so that you can see that that funding need from other sources goes away.
So one more question. On this slide, we were showing $36 million in new debt for this project. I believe that's what the slide says. Does that include the $6 million of debt that we're
Yes.
talking about?
Yes.
So in reality, assuming we take the proceeds from that $6 million in new stormwater debt, and if we choose to apply it to existing stormwater debt, which is the choice the city has, if we make that choice, we're not really
It's net
36 million. It's net
Well,
30.
yeah, right. It's
If we
net
make
30.
that choice.
Right.
But if we don't make that choice, then
Right.
it's not.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
You know, I'm so used to this, I don't always see those angles, so that's helpful. Also, we decided to try to keep things relatively simple tonight, but there's another chart that represents this as well, and we can go over that in another meeting. But we wanted to sort of look at the pie chart view tonight, and then we'll look at some other views in the future meeting, maybe even next week.
I do have one more question on this.
Yeah.
And if it's the wrong time to talk about it, it's okay, but I just noticed that the yellow pie at 8.5 doesn't match up with the 6 million on the previous.
No,
slide.
it does.
If it's getting us off topic.
No, it's 6 million. It's 6 million towards the gateway, towards their 30 million, and 2.5 million towards your 6 million. Okay.
Like that.
Exactly. So you could, and the same thing here. This is 8 million towards them, 500,000 towards you, and then 3 million is towards you. So that's the 6 million. Okay. Going into a little more detail, or a lot more detail on all of these. The first set of bonds we were looking at in that first gold sector are the taxable GO-CID bonds. So this would have the general obligation pledge of the city, but also be backed with this contingent CID assessment that we've discussed before that would kick in should the CID sales tax be insufficient to pay debt service.
Now, is that the developer guarantee? Yeah.
Well, it is a developer guarantee, but it would be an assessment that would be levied on the project to help make up the gap, should there ever be a gap on the CID.
So if the sales tax doesn't make it, then the retailers, owners, whatever, are gonna have to fork over
Is
something.
that a property or sales tax assessment?
It's a property assessment. Yeah, so the CID statute allows for the supplemental sales tax, but then it also allows for a special assessment. And that's what we've pressed onto at this point here. So 8.5 million, then 6 million towards the developers, 30 million, 2.5 towards the cities. Issued at the project start, we paid over basically that 18-year term. Even though CID actually can go another 2 years, we've kept it at the TIP term. We paid with supplemental sales tax on all the sales except for Walmart. Contingent CID assessment would spring, if you will, if sales tax is not equal to debt service. And these bonds are taxable. Remember the shorthand we sort of had about if there's a developer guarantee of some sort or something that's not just general tax. The bonds are typically taxable, and that's the case here with the CID bonds. Okay, so there's going to be a higher interest rate on this than on a GEO bond that you would issue for your own street project because of the private use and benefit you have.
Forgive my ignorance, but what's the reasoning behind the exemption there for Walmart?
They don't ever do CID, they won't increase their prices to allow for it.
What their position is, if Target's not gonna pay it, we're not gonna pay it. Now, the rest of their sales tax goes into the pot, but they're not gonna pay the extra 1% that Target's not paying.
And really, to be clear, it's not Walmart paying, it's the people that shop at Walmart.
Right, exactly,
So
yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
it's actually a good thing, and as long as we're smart about how we're counting revenues, and we never think that they're paying 1%, we'll be fine, because we'll structure on the actual revenues from everyone else.
And just in my opinion, the sales that were projected for Walmart were very, very conservative. And I don't eat my words when RERC comes back, but I mean, I know Walmart's in markets nowhere near as good as this one that are doing a lot better than the numbers that were used over this.
And as you pointed out, which I thought was a great point, on a stormy summer afternoon, people are going to come to this Walmart because of the covered parking, free hail protection, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to some other big box.
Not that we don't know it rain
I'm sorry?
in, not that we don't know it rain in.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions on the CID before I go on to the, oh, actually, I have another slide on the CID here. One of the things we're going to try to start developing, and please give us feedback on this, is sort of representations of this idea of risk and reward that we've been discussing. And, you know, that's ultimately the question that you guys will have is, do you think the financing plan balances risk and reward in a way that makes sense for the city? And so what we tried to do here, and with all the funding pieces, is put the bonds on a continuum between whether the developer and or the bondholder has risk and city risk. And because it is a GO, which would, you know, traditionally put more risk here towards the city side, we've got the springing assessment, which will shift a significant amount of that risk back towards the developer or really the tenants in the project in terms of if that special assessment ever needed to get triggered.
Give me the most likely scenario where the city has risk on this fund.
You'll see it coming up.
And Lawrence, one of the things that has come out of these Friday morning meetings, or Wednesday morning now, whenever they are early in the morning, is that
With lots of coffee.
I mean, there was like an ocean of coffee today, right? Everybody had coffee. Is that, given all that we've heard about GEO, where I was hoping to get to with this kind of risk assessment is that all GEO is not the same. And it wasn't clear to me until 2 or 3 iterations, so that sets up that you will eventually see that triangle probably marching to the right a little bit, but that all GEO debt is not created equally.
Absolutely. Okay, so the 2 shades of green on that pretty pie chart are the 2 GEO bond tracks that are utilizing the sales tip. And I should point out that it's GEO at the outset on one of them, not all the way through. But Lawrence, this is the, quote, highest risk piece in the proposed financing plan. It's the tax-exempt GEO sales tip bonds that would be issued upfront and go for the duration of the tip stream. We're looking at funding about $8.5 million, mostly towards the gateway costs, but some towards the city's costs. I wanted to add this, that they'd be issued at the start, but as to the point that Tom was making, we're going to have in the development agreement certain terms and conditions, like milestones, that need to get met before the city would actually go ahead and issue these bonds. So it's not like you're just going to go out and do this, you know, in October or November. It's going to take more work between now and whenever it's the right time to go. But then repay over a long time frame. probably get the best interest rates on this because it's tax exempt GO. And so this is similar structure to, when you're issuing bonds for Martway or Johnson Drive or what have you. Because the rating agency is ultimately going to look at the GO credit on this piece. We're looking at right now at having minimum debt coverage of 125, and again, that's on that 0% inflation. But this is probably the piece that I'm going to be paying the most attention to because, it's something that if something were to fall out of bed, it would be this, and we want to make sure that this is protected sufficiently, both with its own provisions, like the coverage, but also in relationship to everything else.
And Bruce, the coverage, the 125% coverage, if everything was ideal and everything worked out the way it was supposed to, we would ideally be able to pay these off earlier because we're getting 125% of coverage.
You could.
I mean, you could, right?
Right.
So
If you-
what we're doing is we're taking out a little bit bigger, we're getting a little bit more debt just in case. But if everything works out the way we anticipate or hope, then ideally we could pay it off early.
Because we're essentially saying, for every dollar we need in debt to pay off our debt, we're gonna,
Have a dollar.
So we're gonna borrow
$25.
$125.
and that past slide was 32, right?
Yeah, you're not gonna have,
Oh,
you're not gonna have
sorry.
$1.25.
That was
$1.25.
overly optimistic, yes. This should be 2032, thank you.
Wow, that's,
You gotta borrow,
Yeah.
That would be,
$1.25.
no, you're paying $1 of debt service, principal and interest, and for that $1 debt service, you've got $1.25 of revenues available to pay that.
So you got cushion.
yes.
And that $1.25 is gonna be confirmed for us by RERC, because it all is based on the sales. So, I mean, to Jennifer's point, I mean, we're getting more specific, but until we have the hard data from RERC, then we're kind of speculating about the structure.
And you know earlier when I talked about your interest being aligned with the banks, now, this is a separate financing for the banks. But the banks look at it the same way. Their interest is, do you have $1.25 of NOI, net operating income, to cover your debt service? So they want to know that for every dollar of debt service, you've got $1.25 of income. And if you don't have it, you don't get a loan.
You need a loan.
Yeah.
In some ways, in terms of risk mitigation, this is really the best time to be issuing debt because we saw what went wrong with some of the projects during the boom times when everyone thought it was up. And now, we're smarter for it and we're taking greater precautions. And so the upside potential, I think, is greater because we're taking that more conservative route. The second sales tax track, this would be a temporary, then a permanent financing. Temporary notes would be taxable GO sales tip notes that would then be refunded with tax exempt special obligation, revenue only, sales tax bonds.
And
But-
just briefly, Bruce, sorry, the
Yes.
reason for that is so we can get some sales tax actual numbers under our belt, right?
Right, and so that the bonds, so that you can get the GO bonds off your GO debt
In
capacity.
bondholders from the special, that creates more attractive market for other
selling
bonds.
the track.
Yeah, so you can sell the bonds up front.
Yep.
You have to have the GO,
Yeah.
label on it. And then you retire those
Yeah.
with the special obligation bonds once the project has established a track record that the market can look at and say, oh yeah, Walmart's
Yeah.
doing $1,000 a foot.
Yeah.
So the idea here, though, is that we're not going to sell those GO temp notes unsecured. We're going to have a developer guarantee, basically enhancing 100% of the debt service in the amount that's outstanding during that temporary period, probably about 3 to 4 years. We're thinking that by fall of 2016, give or take, there should be enough track record there with the sales tax collections that we could then refund, get rid of those GO bonds, and replace them with special obligation bonds that would, again, be structured to go that full term, but probably get prepaid to some extent.
Can I say this, New York Eats? They're coming after me and my partners personally before they're coming after you.
Right.
So we get that, we appreciate that, but what happens if you don't have it? You don't got it? Then they come after
And
us.
then-
I'm just saying, New York East.
And what you're gonna do is you're gonna foreclose on the center, and you're gonna sell the center or do whatever you can to get your money. And you're gonna become, quite frankly, you're gonna become partners with the bank.
Well, there's other ways.
I'm saying that's
providing
already with
developer
pessimism.
guarantees, but we don't have to talk about that.
So, say that again.
There's other ways you can provide developer guarantees too, but we don't need to get into that. So those are the details that you'll see in the development agreement. How exactly does this play out? We can talk about worst case scenarios. What happens if the project blows up in the year 2015 and we need to exercise the developer guarantee? How does that work? But that part, has some risk up front in that you can never get rid of all of the risk, but we think it's going to be pretty strong, and then when it goes to a special obligation, the city's risk essentially goes away.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Mhm.
And maybe it's just ignorance on my part, but on the first one, the tax exempt geo sales gift bonds, there's a defined term, but on here it says permanent.
Yes. So permanent means that we're not doing a temporary bond and taking it out with a permanent bond, we're just doing the permanent bonds up front.
That doesn't mean
Say
forever.
that without permanent.
Long term. How about long term?
That's much better.
Permanent, permanent.
There'll be no refinancing of those.
That's, yes, unless interest rates get really good. They're pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
On the continuum, Lawrence, to your question, right, the geos that are tax exempt, we have coverage, but still there's more risk on that piece. With the ones that are the temporary geos, the short term taken out with the long term SO, probably the two triangles start somewhere here in the middle, right? So you can never get rid of that risk completely, but then shifts with the refunding to that side of the ledger. It's really the bondholders that are taking the risk at that point. Okay, how are we doing? Good. Okay. Run to the blue. Doesn't really show up blue there, but this also is a temporary, short-term deal that goes to a long-term or permanent deal. We also sometimes use the term definitive financing. Do you like that better? Or should I-
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay. So the idea here, though, is that with the property tip, it's SO, revenue only from the get-go. Now, we know that most likely, even though there's more of a market for property tip bonds, there's probably going to need to be some kind of developer guarantee during the construction and lease-up, because it's just, very few people are willing to buy a bond, a revenue bond, without any enhancement at the outset when it's just yield. But the idea here also is that, essentially we could take out that temporary bond with a definitive bond that doesn't have the developer guarantee sometime around the year 2016. And so, not surprisingly, here also, we're showing minimal city risk on the spectrum because it's special obligation. Now, so this debt is going to cost the most, right? It's going to have the highest interest rate, highest coverage requirements. It's going to cost Tom the most in terms of getting the developer guarantee in order to place it. But we feel like this piece, because it is the property tax piece, makes the most sense to have as the true revenue-only piece from the outset.
So, Bruce, I'm going to ask a very fundamental question. At the end of the day, none of these bonds can be issued unless the bond market sees fit for them to be issued, right? Well, is that correct? I mean, we can't just go say we want to issue $100 million of bonds. And just
Somebody's
go do
got to
it.
buy them.
Somebody has to buy them first. So there has to be due diligence that's performed. to ensure that developers in the cities are good for if worst case scenario happens, right?
Absolutely.
So like we're doing RERC, we're doing Conrad, we're doing other things. The bond market process also facilitates, and we have to bring forth, we have to air our dirty laundry, if you will. The skeletons in the closet kind of have to be exposed so that the bond market can be created for you.
Right, absolutely. And so that's true with both the SO bonds, where they'll really be scrutinizing every aspect of the project. And then on the GEO bonds, they'll be looking really at the project, very much so, but also at the city's overall creditworthiness with your own property taxes and other revenue streams. And we would expect Amy to actually bring Moody's to town to have those conversations just because of the complexity of it.
Quick question, Bruce. Let's say we anticipate X number of dollars coming in through our different vehicles, and it ends up being, and there's a structure on paying off the debt. We know what the payments are going to be each quarter.
Twice a year.
Twice a year. Okay. What if we have extra money that's been received? Let's say, one payment's going to be $20,000, and we ended up with $23,000 from
The revenues.
the revenues. What happens to that $3,000? Is it in a separate account earmarked for?
That's a great question. It depends on the kind of bond, and you would have some discretion depending on the type of bond with deciding what to do with that. Let me give you 3 different scenarios. There's probably going to be some bonds that are going to have what's called a super sinker clause, where the bond documents say, not super soaker, super sinker.
Take super soakers back.
I know, I would agree. The idea there is that you're vacuuming up that extra money and automatically paying down bonds as part of the deal itself. You're just paying down those bonds as much as you can with the excess revenues. Next option, depending on the bond issue, would be where you save up that money in a dedicated account. And then once you reach its call date on the bonds, maybe it's 8 years from now, if you have $1 million saved up, you could pay off $1 million of what's left on the bonds, after that 8-year mark, or more or less. The third option, again, that we think will be in play for certain bonds, is where you can actually collect those extra dollars and use those towards some of your stormwater debt service that you've got, so that you don't have to use either other revenue sources to pay that debt service, or you could potentially do something else with your stormwater utility. So you've got 3 really good, all very valid ways to utilize that excess revenue. Either super sync, where you're paying off the bonds automatically, saving it up to do a future redemption, or capturing that cash flow to put towards your stormwater debt.
But
or all of the 3.
But it all does have to go towards debt.
Actually, not technically, no. The developer's attorney with Hosanelli, there is latitude within the TIF law that says you can actually in CID, you could use those towards, in certain cases, operating costs of the city as well.
Who decides that?
We do.
We do.
You in the bond market.
Right,
And it's going to be,
depending on the type of bond issue.
yeah, what type of bond issue it is, and then your guys' business decisions that you
Right.
make. You
I'm all for getting rid of the debt myself.
Yeah, and then
Okay,
you
I
have
was
it
just wondering
dedicated and clean.
What would happen, or how the extra, if there is any, be
Yeah.
utilized?
I would just point out, and we can get much more into detail on those TIF strategy points later, but with TIF, you're not just capturing property TIF, you're not just capturing incremental city property taxes, you're capturing county and other jurisdictions as well. So if you just pay off those bonds as fast as you can, and I guess that's really the property tax bonds, which you may have to do anyways, but that's another story. then you close down the TIF district and you can't capture that full amount of increment anymore. So there's going to be a sort of a balancing act, and you're going to have to think strategically about which ones you want to pay off as fast as possible, which ones you might want to stretch so that you can use those revenues for other purposes, and strike a balance that makes sense for the consensus.
If you pay off the debt though, don't you get all the revenue then going?
No.
But you get less revenue. Like the,
Not with the property TIF, right?
But not with the property tip, but with the,
With
like the sales
TIF,
tax, yeah.
yes,
Then
absolutely.
that would be,
Right. Once you pay off the sales TIF bonds, then you're getting that full 1 cent back to the city.
In the general fund.
Right.
and we have to service the bonds, so we're paying money to get one.
Well, but if you pay those off, then you're not.
Correct. But if we don't pay them off and we put
Yes.
it into the general fund and spend it, then,
Right. But you may decide, I mean, again, this is probably getting into the weeds here, but if we sell some of these bonds with an interest rate of 3%, just hypothetically speaking, and let's say 10 years from now, interest rates are more like 6 and 8%, which they very well could be, you may decide, hey, let's not pay off some of these bonds early, because a 3% carrying cost is really good, and we can actually utilize some of that money and maybe not have to issue bonds for a city project. 10 years from now, we can actually just use cash for that and avoid having to pay 6 or 8% interest on a new bond issue. So it's...
when do we decide that?
You would, what's
Way in
that?
the weeds, way in the weeds, pull
Weeds.
it back.
All right, sorry.
But
You need a hook, just...
Go ahead.
Bruce, I do want to make sure I understood something you said a while back before you got into the weeds, is you talked about 3 options. And to Will's question about the excess money, the third option you said was paying off stormwater debt. I want to make sure I understood. You were talking about this, not the $6 million of debt that's wrapped up in
Right.
this project, but this other $6 million of debt, which is
cash
under
flow.
the cities.
Full-time cash flow.
So,
Right.
so that what you call the $6 million net present value is what you were saying. We could move some of that money into our own debt payoff quicker.
Right.
I want to make sure that's what you were saying.
Okay, sorry, I'll try to stay out of the weeds. Last piece, really quick, just know that it's in play, we're working on this still, is to utilize the stormwater drainage district. We think that with a reasonable level of special assessment on the square footage in the gateway, so 740,000 square feet, that we can fund about $3 million. And again, this is to help pay off some of the debt that you've already incurred. Just know that we're working with, not only negotiating with the developers, but also working with the bond council, your development council, and coming up with what we think makes the most sense. And on that, it's GO, but we've got this adjustable, potentially adjustable assessment mechanism to be determined. So we think somewhere in the middle on this side, because you can shift risk with this assessment. But really at this point, focus on CID, sales tip, and property tip. This will be it's important, but it's not as important as the big 3. So, to conclude, you've got, as I see it, 3 really fundamental decisions to make. And some of them are sequential, some are going to be coming up at the same time in October. But as I see it, you can see it as a waterfall or as a ladder. But the first question is, do you think this project needs TIP and CID assistance in some way, shape, or form? Do you think it's feasible without it? Do you think it's appropriate for the city to be involved with TIP and CID, sort of as a philosophical question? And if you don't do TIP and CID, what's the alternative? But if you answer yes to TIP and CID assistance, the next question is, do you think that the $30 million gateway funding target is appropriate? Now, you're not just going to be answering that question in the abstract. You're going to have but-for analysis. You're going to have but-for analysis and internal rate of return analysis and other measures of what we think the developer's return on investment are going to be. So you can say, hey, we think 30 million is about right, or whatever the case might be. Well, no, it's 6 to the city, though. So the 30 is to the gateway.
It's net 30.
Net 30.
It's net 30. I like that.
Okay.
Are you saying we need to vote on this next Wednesday before we get all the numbers?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay. Great, next Wednesday, I was seeing next Wednesday.
no, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, thank you,
But
thank you.
if, after discussions of the TIP and the CID and the 30 million funding and the but-for and the internal rate of return, if you think, yeah, this makes sense, the extraordinary cost of this project, what they've already incurred, what they will be incurring to build this project with the density and the parking and everything else, if you think that does make sense to target $30 million, then the third question is really, well, how do we get to that? Given the RERC revenue streams, given the bond market realities, given interest rates and coverage ratios, do you think that this framework that we've discussed makes sense or something else? And this will really get laid out in the development agreement, right? That financing plan, the blueprint, will get laid out in the development agreement. But it's a sequence from really big question to medium question to defined details, okay? And I just wanted to end with the idea that you're going to have a lot more discussion, both at committee meetings and special council workshops, and you're going to actually have votes on a heck of a lot of things. Next week at Finance and Admin, I believe there's going to be a funding resolution asking you to give a general blessing towards this framework with the idea that there's a lot of details to be worked out. It's all contingent on RERC and the actual development agreement terms. But we want to know if this basically is worth pursuing. So that's going to be discussed next week. You're going to be asked to endorse the actual development plan. But, Martin can speak to this, but you'll have a vote on that. You'll be asked to vote on approving the TIP project and the CID itself. So those mechanisms. You'll vote on the development agreement. That's probably the biggest vote, is voting on whether to approve that set of agreements between the city and the developers, including the bond financing plan with those terms and conditions. And then you'll still also vote on each individual bond issue, right? So it's not like once you vote on the development agreement, everything goes on autopilot. You're still having advice and consent and the ultimate approval responsibility on those bond issues. And I'm probably missing something there, but I just wanted you to see that there's a lot more discussion and decision making to come, even after, well, really a lot after the discussion that will happen next week. Okay, I appreciate your patience.
So Bruce, thank you very much, and Tom, thank you. I think, and Dave, Dave and I have been in these meetings, and we're working really hard to understand what's the right level of information to provide you guys and when. My question is, I think kind of Mike detailed out a little bit high level. We only have 6 weeks till October 17th. So what other questions do you have? And maybe they're just hypothetical questions at this point, but are you comfortable? Are you not comfortable? Is there more information you need? I know we're going to get into a little bit more detail, but to be frank, this is the plan, and it's more detail on this plan we've initiated until we hear back from RERC, and then that could change the whole dynamic of everything. We're hoping not, right? But what else do you guys need to feel comfortable about making a decision around, probably more around the I would say the finance,
Right, because that's where we have the greatest influence.
Great.
I think it would probably be a good idea to find out, and Mike, you could probably do this better than anybody, would be, given the scope of the project, what would be our estimated income from transportation utility fee? Any other kind of income sources that may be generated by the project being a part of the community?
So like franchise fees, so all the utilities,
Yeah.
just to get us a good idea as to what this project is going to bring to us.
And then the force of sales tax, what does that contribute to the road program?
Because right now, we're looking at how do we make the project become a reality? I want to find out what that reality is going to give us in return.
Right.
It's good.
Because there's gonna be some immediate return as well as the 15 years down the road return that starts coming a little bit.
And that's one of the things that you guys were gonna do for us, was give us the breakdowns, even on the building permits and the, you know, and that is one thing I'd like to have in front of me, the RERC, all of that information was promised to us before we had to make a decision.
And we'll get that, we absolutely will get that.
That would be
And,
wonderful.
you know, another, I think, kind of eye-popping number is that initial estimates are that this project alone will add about 10% to the tax base. And we'll see, you know, RERC is looking at that as well, looking at comps and other information, but even though that gets captured in the property tip initially, Pat, to your point, down the road, once the
Right.
property tip is done, that's, you know, a pretty significant increase in the city's tax base.
I just want to, Jennifer, the only vote that's going to happen next week is just to vote to put it on for public hearing on October 17th. You're not being asked to make any decision other than we're going to have a public hearing on October 17th.
That's great, that's
I mean, I
great.
just wanted to make sure you knew that because I know Bruce had all these
So
upcoming
you have to
votes.
sweat it.
That's what the vote is next week, just to put it on October 17th.
That's wonderful. And we will get that other
Right, and we're gonna get
information
all the other
before we
information
have to
before
make a
October
decision.
17th.
That's
And
great.
that's all we're voting for is next week is just to put it on for October 17th. Because there's a day requirement in the statute.
Great, this isn't,
You're not being asked to vote on that, on the financing plan, on any of that, because we don't have all the information.
wonderful.
Go back to Amy's question. Will, I really like your answer, by the way. Amy, I don't have additional information today I could tell you I want to hear. There's going to be a ton of information thrown at us between now and October 17th. But I would take your question and flip it a little bit in terms of that last slide that Bruce showed regarding the 3 council decisions. I really like the way you framed that, Bruce. I think those are the 3 major decisions facing the city. And another way that I looked at it is question number 1, yes to TIP and CID assistance. To me, that's more of a philosophical question. As a city, are we willing to do TIP and CID just in a philosophical debate or position? Question number 2 on the yes, the 30 million funding target. To me, that's a question whether we want to buy something for $30 million. In essence, a development agreement is going to be placed to us, and we're going to be asked, for $30 million, you want to buy this development agreement. It's in effect, it's kind of a contract to purchase. We get this development if we're putting up $30 million of tax dollars. Now, the developer may want to frame it differently, but that's his choice. And then the third question on the yes to TIP and CID bond financing plan, to me, that's a question of risk. So yes, we like the philosophical debate or the philosophical position. Yes, we want to buy. Yes, we're comfortable with the risk of making the purchase or not. Those are the 3 things I see, and I like the way you put it. So in terms of your question, Amy, so much information is going to be thrown at us, it's going to be easy to get lost. And if the information can be put into that context, and in terms of here's information that helps you assess the risk, here's information that helps you assess what it is you're actually buying. So when Will talks about what are the future revenues to the city, to me that's part of the buying decision. If we buy this package, we expect to get these revenues. And when we talk about the TIA funding mechanisms, a lot of that gets to we're comfortable with this risk. So if you can help orient the information you throw at us, that would, so for each of us, each of the 8 of us, I'm guessing that some of us have different concerns with each of those 3 questions. And if you can orient the information to those questions, each of us individually can work through those questions.
Absolutely.
And see if we can get to 3 yeses.
And I think, Lawrence, thanks for teeing it up that way. I guess in my mind, I know each of you have concerns on some level with some aspects of this just based on previous conversations we've had. And so I would encourage to bring those concerns up earlier rather than later, because the more time we have to vet and discuss and talk through that, it's only beneficial to us instead of being here at the 11th hour. And I mean, I have a question, and it's 9:45, so I don't expect the answer now. But maybe we can think about talking and then see if anybody else has the same interest as well. Is because I know Dave and I frequently have said, okay, well, what if we didn't have an appetite? What would the project be? The project would be a strip mall. And, you know, Tom kind of gave us some information today. He's like, I don't think it'd be a strip mall. So my question would. Censor, I mean, is it like 9:40 and you're done? I mean, what's the deal? My question would be, is if you could take anything out of it, so again, I don't think we have the, you know, brain power and the attention span to deal with it today. If you could take anything out of it and make it less expensive and reduce the ask on the table, reduce the risk, reduce the buy from the city's perspective, is there anything? So just, you know, kind of think about that, and you can talk through it with Mike or whatever, but is there anything that, you know, so that's the question I have.
A process question for next week is basically Gateway, what's on Finance Administration next week. Are we coming here to talk basically just Gateway next week? Do we know that?
I haven't seen the agenda.
The finance administration and special meeting be after that.
Which is Gateway as well.
Which is just beyond setting the public hearing on October 17th.
So are we having a work, I guess, are we having a work session? Are we just having finance and, I think what you're asking is
No.
finance and administration focusing just on Gateway period?
I'm asking if there's anything else of substance on the finance meeting, because I assume, this is substantive right here, which is on next week's agenda. And so my comment was gonna be, tying into Amy's question from earlier, obviously it's just a committee decision next week, the full council decision comes the following week. But as we all know, the more we can get through on the committee, the better we are when we get to council. If you want, this is very substantive, if you want us to be, or at least if you want me, I'm guessing it's probably all 8 of us, will be able to engage on this fully next Wednesday, the more information we can have before we come here. That way, if there's something we don't see before we come in the chamber, we can tell you. Instead of being here saying, well, where's this information? We expected it. And then it's like, well, it's too late.
But we're not gonna have RERC.
I know that.
Okay.
But as long as you give us expectations before we come in this chamber, what it is you're planning to show us and what you're not planning to show us, that way we can ask you.
I understand.
So you can have time to grab anything we need to consider that. Obviously, this is all we're considering, I think, unless there's some other
I don't
procedural
know, I haven't
stuff.
seen the agenda, Mike. Is there any other items?
There's going to be possibly 3 other items. Non-dealing.
There's
Non-gateway, there's street light,
sirens.
siren replacement, and nationwide CID.
We may have them try to study.
Wow.
We
Oh
have
my
some-
God.
Now you're talking. That was just a disaster
Yeah,
last time we approved one of those things.
So we might have to stop the finance committee to have a special city council meeting and go back to it.
This is just very substantive. So my point is,
Absolutely.
try to get us ahead of time
I
so
like-
we
I
can
like-
be prepared.
That's a great suggestion. We'll tell you what the course of the discussion we think should be, and you tell us if there's gaps.
Okay.
Good time.
Thank
Giants are
you.
down by 7, bud.
Thank
Thanks a lot.